Welcome back. This is the Steve Malzberg Show, and I'm George Marlin, filling in for Steve today. Our next guest is Sean Davis. Sean is the co-founder of the Federalist, an online magazine, and chief operating officer of Media Trackers, a nonprofit government watchdog. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, George.
Why don't you just tell our viewers, listeners, first of all, the Federalist. What is that?
The Federalist is a great new online magazine of culture, politics, and religion. It was started by Ben Domenech and I, and we both have a long history working in politics and policy, and wanted to start a site that allowed for a little more long-form analysis of politics and policy. You can go to it at thefederalist.com.
Federalist.com. So you're not related to the Federalist Society. You're a separate entity.
We are, sir.
Okay, good. And you had an interesting piece on the minimum wage. Now, it's interesting. I'm finding it that if you obey the law and pay, particularly in small businesses and fast food places, the minimum wage, you're suddenly becoming demonized as an evil person. In addition to President Obama ordering federal vendors to bring up the minimum wage to $10.10, the Port Authority in New York, New Jersey, a bi-state agency, the executive director the other day announced that he sent a letter to their vendors, particularly the airlines at the three major airports at the Port Authority overseas in New York, that they too will have to have their vendors and their employees make at least $10.10 an hour. And again, it's being hailed by liberals as the dawn of a new municipal era. So there seems to be this demonization, and the government is using their power to force people to pay more. And so my first question in relation to that, liberals are now questioning and saying studies that say raising the minimum wage, particularly in this case, it'll be about a 30% increase, does not cost jobs. Does it cost jobs in your professional judgment?
Absolutely, and I'm somebody who studied finance and economics for quite some time, and the claim that even the research supports this notion that it doesn't cost jobs is kind of crazy. I mean, you can probably find any research paper anywhere to tell you whatever you want, but the bulk of economic research, which is based on pretty common economic theory, is that if you have a price floor for something, in this case the minimum wage, you're going to end up with higher unemployment because employers are just going to demand less labor if you're going to artificially raise the price of it. So the vast majority of economic research out there confirms the common sense judgment that says, look, if you make something more expensive, people are going to want less of it.
Well, it would strike me in a small business, a fast food business, luncheonette, you got 6 people working for you. Suddenly you got to pay people an extra $3 an hour. You might just eliminate one job because you add it up for 6 or 10 employees, particularly in a luncheonette, fast food kind of place, small businesses like that, it could have a serious impact on your bottom line. So they may not be able to pass it on to their customers in a small business. I'm guessing the vendors, like the airlines at the Port Authority in New York, New Jersey, at Kennedy, LaGuardia, or Newark Airport, they're just going to increase their prices when their contracts come up. Do you think that's going to happen at the federal level too, that this is just going to be passed on to us, the taxpayers, because they've had to pay more to employees, particularly federal vendors?
Well, you know, there's basically two things that can happen when you make people pay more for a good than what the market says it's worth. Is either in the case of the minimum wage and labor, there's going to be less work available, fewer hours, fewer employees, or you're going to see prices, those hikes passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. I tend to think, and I think most of the research out there says, that you see a much greater employment effect than you see a price effect, which means that you're likely to see a lot more people lose their jobs or lose hours than you will see prices going up. And so what happens is you have this perverse effect. We're being told that this is to help low-wage workers and low-skilled workers. That's not the case. They're actually going to be the ones who pay the price and may end up losing a job or losing hours because of this. It hurts them. It does not help them.
Well, it's interesting. Anecdotally, talking to colleagues of mine, I run a small business in Philadelphia. They have kids who work part-time after school, make a few bucks, and they found at the end of the year their kids were being cut down in hours in part-time jobs. Part of it probably had to do with Obamacare. So, yes, I would presume you're right to say there is an effect where hours are being cut back, and they may be cut back even more, or a kid will get laid off. So that's part of the reality. Do you think there's a false premise where Obama and others, particularly people on the left, try to promote this like people are starving on the streets because they're only making the minimum wage? And when they try to create the impression that most people on minimum wage are like the main breadwinner in a household. That's not the case. What are the numbers? What's the real breakdown on this?
That's a great question. And thankfully, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is run out of the Department of Labor, actually puts out some great data on who actually earns the minimum wage. And if you look at this data, which I did for a piece I wrote for the Federalist, it turned out that the majority of people who earn the minimum wage are younger than 25 years old, and over a third are actually teenagers between the ages of 16 and 19 years old. Most of them are single. So this picture of a struggling dad trying to feed his wife and multiple children earning over $7.25 an hour, that's really not the typical person who earns the minimum wage. The typical person who makes $7.25 an hour is somebody who dropped out of high school, who's under the age of 25, and who is unmarried. And those are just the facts. Those are what the data tell us about minimum wage workers.
So what do you think all this hype is for? To get the base going for the November elections? Do you think this has legs on it? Are we going to see the minimum wage increase to 10.10? What is the purpose of 10.10, except it sounds like 10.10 wins or something, the old news station in New York. But why do you think they came up with that number, $10.10?
That's a great question. I actually don't know why they picked 10.10 and not, say, $100 an hour or $1,000 an hour.
Or $10 an hour, 10.20. 10.10. That's what they came up. So I guess that's going to be a rallying cry throughout the course of the year or something like that. But do you think it has legs? Is it going to get through the Congress? What's going to happen here in your judgment?
There's a great quote from J.P. Morgan, the investment banker, and he said, every man has two reasons for everything he does, the good reason and the real reason. And the real reason, I think, here is it's a payback to unions. It's not about helping low-wage workers because they'll actually be hurt by it. It's about paying back the unions whose contracts require payment to be minimum wage plus a specific percent, or the contracts that require wage renegotiations when the minimum wage changes.
Oh, wait. Unions, I'm from New York, so it may be different across the country. Most unions are not working for anything near the minimum wage. I mean, putting aside municipal employee unions, you're talking about the steam fitters, the carpenters, the electrical unions, et cetera. So what's the connection here? I'm missing something. What's the connection?
The connection is the contracts are often either a minimum wage plus a percent or a multiple of the minimum wage. So it's not that they're making $7.25 an hour. It's that their contracts mandate minimum wage times 3 or minimum wage plus 400%.
So in other words, if it goes up, to keep it simple, if it goes up from $7 to $10, that $3 increase has a multiple and affects other people, that union contracts, employees go up relative to that several times, several hundred years. So
that's correct. And often the contracts will stipulate that management and the unions have to renegotiate the salary and benefit contracts when the minimum wage changes.
So if the minimum wage goes up, no matter what the length of the contract is, it sort of freezes or terminates, and you got to start all over again?
You have to open renegotiation. There's a union analyst named Richard Berman who wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal, I think last year, who looked at hundreds of contracts and found those provisions lived throughout them. So in my view, the real issue here with the minimum wage push is it's a payback or a down payment for union support. I personally don't think it has anything to do with helping actual people who earn the minimum wage. And to get back to your earlier question, do I think it's going to go anywhere? I would be shocked if something like this made it through the Congress this year. I really think it's just a payback for unions and a rallying cry for the Democrats' base.
So in other words, you're suggesting that if the minimum wage goes up 25% for the sake of argument, then make it 30% for the sake of argument, 30% for the sake of argument. Somebody who's making $20 an hour may have a clause in his contract where his hourly rate from $20 can go up 30%. Is that what you're suggesting? Okay, that's amazing. That's a new one to me. That's interesting to know. That that explains a lot, and you may be right. Everything is being stopped towards the unions because that's the only basic force they have to get out in the fall elections. And certainly where I live in New York State, the public employee unions are the most powerful unions we have in the state of New York, particularly the teachers union. And something like pre-K that they're talking about, that's another sop to the unions, because in New York City alone, it would create jobs for 2,000 more teachers, which means 2,000 more people paying dues, meaning they have that much more money to spend in elections to promote their candidates for office. We have about a minute and 20 seconds left here. Just a quick one. Since you're the Federalist, I assume you have some thoughts on James Madison and other people, but executive orders, do you think his threats the other day are going to have real teeth? Is there a serious damage in your judgment he could do? Got about 45, 50 seconds left.
I think he can do real damage. You know, I don't remember which founder said it, but we're supposed to be a country of laws, not men. And presidents and government officials are supposed to enforce laws as written, not arbitrarily choose to enforce or ignore what they want to enforce. And what we've seen with Obamacare and so many different laws is this president seems to care very little for the limits that are placed on his power by the founders. So I think his threats could very well be damaging, depending on how willing he is to follow through on them.
Oh, I tend to think you agree. Once again, what is your website for your online magazine? Where can people find it?
It is thefederalist.com.
And how long have you been in business?
We launched on September 18th, so we've only been going for a couple months, but we've been really, really excited about the response and about the traffic we've gotten. It's been great so far.
That's terrific. Good luck to you, Sean. Thank you for joining us today. Hope you can come back again.
Thank you, sir. It was my privilege.
Okay. Coming up on the next segment, I am going to be talking to an old friend of mine, the state editor and columnist for the New York Post, Fred Dicker of Albany, a great man, although we don't agree on everything, but the one thing we have in common is we've been called extremists by Andrew Cuomo. This is George Marlin for Steve Malzberg. We'll be right back on Newsmax TV.
The Steve